with great pleasure that I speak to you this evening as the daughter of a breast cancer survivor, as the sister of a breast cancer victim currently battling metastatic disease, as the sister-in-law of a survivor, as the niece through marriage of both survivors and victims, as a doctor specializing in the detection of early breast cancers, and lastly, as a 2-year breast cancer survivor. As a point of reference, when I started medical school back in the 80s, I could have never anticipated that I would go into breast imaging, let alone radiology. In addition, it should be known that up until about 7 years ago, there was absolutely no history of breast cancer in my family. Tonight, I would like to share my story. Can we lower the lights just a little bit more, please? We all have a story to tell, and my story begins in January of 2008. A very dear friend and colleague, Dr. Megha Joshi, had been inviting me to her native country of India for many years. We had worked together for a number of years. And life was so busy at that point. I was a full-time radiologist. I was a very busy mother of 2 wonderful daughters. And I was married to a busy surgeon. I could never find the time to get away. At least not feeling too guilty. Or perhaps it was my own contrived self-importance. Maybe I just didn't want to believe that my family could somehow survive those 2 to 3 weeks without me. For whatever reason, in 2008, I decided that the time was right and I needed to do this. Eat, Love, and Pray, ironically, was a popular book that year. Of course, I had to read it. It definitely set the mood. We were scheduled to leave on a Saturday. The Wednesday before, my mother was coming from Rhode Island, where she resides, to my hospital to have thyroid biopsies. I wasn't too concerned about this because luckily most thyroid biopsies are benign. But while she was in our department, she said to me, Audrey, I discovered a lump, or I felt a lump a couple of days ago in my breast. Well, my heart sank. I tried to conceal my emotions, but as soon as we finished that thyroid biopsy, I brought her right to ultrasound, and I scanned her breast myself. As I scanned her breast, my heart sank further. How many daughters have had to diagnose breast cancer in their own mother? I can still remember my arms and legs starting to tremble and feel like rubbery. I asked a colleague to do a biopsy, and I stood at my mother's side as a daughter holding her hand. My mother's thyroid biopsies turned out to be benign as expected. However, on Friday, the day before I was to leave for India, breast cancer was confirmed. Perhaps this trip really wasn't meant to be after all. But no, everyone, including my parents, encouraged that I leave. This diagnosis definitely set the tone, which perhaps allowed me to experience India in a way that I may have otherwise missed. Little did I know the spiritual strength, courage, and serenity that I would gain, which would help me prepare for what was to come. When I returned from India, my mother had a definitive surgery. Thankfully, the tumor was small, contained. Just as her radiation treatments were ending, in the spring of 2008, I discovered a lump. I was 48 at the time, and ironically, 5 years prior, my elder sister, also at age 48, had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She, in fact, was the first female relative in our family to be diagnosed. My mammogram was normal, not a surprise, as I will point out later in this talk. Ultrasound appearance was more concerning. I called a dear colleague, Dr. Elsie Levin. She took me immediately, did a biopsy that day, and 2 days later called to tell me that I had invasive breast cancer. Next came the emotional roller coaster ride that so many have endured. The fear, the uncertainty, and pain that we have witnessed our patients go through. Surgery, then I needed more surgery, then I needed an MRI, then I needed a bone scan, then I needed a CAT scan. And finally, my treatment options. Well, there weren't too many options for me. Yes, I would need radiation. Yes, I would need chemotherapy. And yes, I was now officially overwhelmed, demoralized, and terrified. One of the first women I called was a local neighbor and friend. She had been through this ordeal in the recent past. Ironically, my husband and I had the privilege of being her doctors. How quickly the tables can turn. Joan Van Roden, who is here in the audience this evening as my guest, is a survivor with positive energy and so much to share. Among her many talents, she is an accomplished artist. This is her self-portrait that she painted during her treatment of breast cancer. And this is a beautiful water scene that Joan painted for my husband and me after her treatments. We cherish it. Joan wrote to me in one of her emails, during the most difficult periods, I practiced positive thinking and focused on the rich and beautiful things in my life. One of the most precious gifts to me were those from family and friends. The support I received was amazing, and I finally learned how to accept these gifts from others. I could learn so much from Joan. Again, that Indian spirituality resurfacing. And so, the healers needed healing, and the caregivers needed caring. And Joan came into our life with such compassion and control, coaching my husband and me in that uncomfortable act of receiving. She immediately took on the arduous task of food coordinator in scheduling meals from so many of our friends, making sure there wasn't duplicate or too much. And the meals, all incredible, kept coming. My husband wrote in his Pink Chronicle blog to family and friends during my treatments, there is something about the communal spirit of a dinner with friends that feeds both the palate and the soul. Soon after my second round of chemotherapy, I started to have that tingly sensation in my scalp. I knew what was coming next. I was prepared. Picking out a wig had been a family event. My daughters and my husband joined in the fun of trying on wigs. Well, maybe not my husband, but the girls. I can assure you we giggled and laughed quite a bit. What fun until reality set in. This is an Indian painting of a head shaving ritual. Again, thoughts of India resurfaced. On one of my side trips in India, I visited a city called Tirupati, which is an ancient pilgrimage temple city. For many families, there is a ritual of head shaving upon arrival, and I witnessed this firsthand. Head shaving, or tonsure, can be seen in all religions. It is viewed as a sign of spiritual submission, surrender. Mega described, every hair represents an attachment to the material world. Shaving the head means giving up all these attachments. On a higher level, it is also a sign of detachment from the physical body to identify with one's inner spirit. In an email correspondence, I wrote to Mega, "Chemo went well. Today I decided to shave my head and pick up the wig that I ordered." Sash, our daughter, came with me and held my hand the entire time. It was much more of a spiritual experience than I had expected as I reflected once again on our trip to India. Not a tear was shed. I felt liberated. My partners were outstanding throughout my treatment. After I was diagnosed, I stopped reading breast cases. I couldn't bear it. Until one day, when we were very backed up at the breast center, patients were waiting for mammograms, ultrasounds, biopsies, and the surgeons were waiting to see those patients who were waiting for their studies, so everyone was pretty stressed. One of the mammography techs knocked on my closed office door and said, at that point in time, I was just reading anything but breast imaging cases. She knocked on the door and she said, "Dr. Frisora, I know that you're not reading breast cases, but we are just so backed up. Is there any way you can help me with this patient? She's 38 and she's pregnant and she's here for a lump." Well, I couldn't say no. Also, most lumps that occur during pregnancy are not breast cancer. As I looked at her mammogram, I became horrified and outright angry. How could this possibly happen to a sweet, soon-to-be young mother? I brought her straight to ultrasound. My suspicion was confirmed. I proceeded to biopsy. Yes, a highly aggressive breast cancer, fueled by all the hormones of pregnancy. My adrenaline was flowing. The Audrey that I knew was back, and I knew from that day on what I needed to do, back in the breast arena where I was so comfortable, where I belonged, doing what I loved.